certainly, I want to thank each of you, applaud you for saying you really want to create a more authentic type of leadership culture and developing your next generation of leaders. There's not a lot of senior executives or business owners who want to put this kind of effort into their process, and yet you're going to see some statistics here of how that impacts your bottom line results. I can assure you, not only will your customers notice the difference as you create that leadership culture, but it will positively impact the bottom line. Okay? To get started, I thought it was helpful to first of all kind of walk back a little bit in history, because there's been this shift. There's been a labor movement. If we think back to the agricultural age or the industrial age, literally we had the role of where the individuals in charge, the managers, they were kind of the brains of the operation, the heads of the operation. The laborers, the workers, basically got the job done. They were the hands of the operation. And essentially those managers simply told the employees what to do, how to do it, and expected it to get done. And the employees basically followed their instructions and their orders in order to get the job done. It was your old traditional, what we call command and control style of leadership. And it seemed to work fairly well through those periods of time. But as we progressed out of those eras, the agricultural and industrial era, we literally started relying less and less on our employees' physical strength, and we started relying more on their mental capabilities. So we moved into what we call this information age. Some people might call it I guess it's like the technological age, the knowledge age. It really doesn't matter. It's just this concept of the shift of what we have now expected and sometimes demanded of our employees today, which is we want them to think for themselves. I can't tell you how many times I speak to business owners and executives who say, I just want my employees to take greater initiative. I want them to think for themselves about what they're doing. I want them to become better problem solvers, better decision makers. I can't keep doing all this myself. So you can see the shift of how we want our employees to take greater ownership in what they're doing. And so we've made this movement with our labor. Regrettably, what hasn't made the shift is how we lead. We are still leading through that old command and control style of leadership. And we wonder why we have some challenges, human resource challenges today. One of I read a lot. I love to read. And one of the quotes that I found from a previous presentation was that the 21st century will be the century of change. More things will change in more places in the next 10 years than the previous 100. And think about all the changes and how fast things are moving. Well, we're in it. We are smack dab in the middle of it. We're experiencing how fast things are changing around us, and it's hard for us to keep up if you think about all the things you have on your plate today. So we've got to realize, though, that as we look at our businesses going forward, many things happen because of either choice or circumstance. The choices we obviously control. The circumstances are those things that we can't control. They just happen to us. We can't plan for them. We have a choice of how we react to the circumstances. But you have a choice today, and it sounds like you're making that choice based on the survey that you completed, which is we want to choose to create more of a culture around leadership development and develop our future leaders. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, this morning. One of the statistics that helps to support this is a study conducted every 10 years. And as you see the shift, what it's saying here is back in 1975, if you're measuring the overall value of an organization, 83% was based on the tangible assets. Value came from tangible assets. In 2015, that has shifted to where 81% is now coming from its intangible assets. That's people. Your people are making the difference here. we have to rely on our human capital. And I see some of you pulling out your phones. I'll tell you, bonus time. I'm going to send all of you, if you'd like it, Kevin's got a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. We'll give this to you. Because there's a lot of great information here that will be helpful for you. So please don't feel like you've got to take a lot of notes and things. You're going to get a copy of it, okay? So what this is saying is that we truly have shifted to what we call the people age. And you can have the greatest products, the greatest services. Anybody ever walk into a Chick-fil-A lately? Have you noticed the difference in Chick-fil-A versus maybe a Burger King? I hope nobody owns a Burger King around here, but it's like, have you noticed the difference? What do you think that difference is? It's not necessarily the people.
What about the chicken?
It's all about the chicken. No. So there's a big difference. You can have the best product and the best service, but if your people aren't delivering it the way it should be delivered, with passion, with excellence, with a commitment for them to truly represent your product and service in the best way, sometimes people just aren't going to go back. I know I'm busy filling out surveys a lot, and there's one I just recently sent. It's like, we will not be back. And it had nothing to do with food. It was about the service and the attitude of the people who served us. So we're in the people age. If we don't address the people, human capital, human resource kinds of needs today, I mean, this is kind of what's going on. You know, we're seeing trust issues, low morale, job satisfaction, engagement issues, absenteeism, you know, turnover, baby boomers are retiring. You know, how do we attract and retain? I mean, are you experiencing any of this? I mean, if you're like any of our other clients, everybody's experiencing this. The most folks are experiencing this. And everybody continues to talk about the generational difference, and I'm going to be sticking around for the millennial conversation as well, because I'm always enthused to hear about that. If it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. So really, even though these are challenges for us today, embrace them. Because as we look at what our challenges are, it makes us stronger. It allows us to grow. Many times when people, from a personal goal standpoint, changes, it's because I'm at my lowest. I can't get any lower. I refuse to continue to live like this. My hands, I'm turning it over to you, Lord. I mean, many times when people truly change, it's because they've hit almost rock bottom. So if it doesn't challenge you, it's not going to change you. So embrace the challenges, okay? So I thought it was interesting you put your survey results up here earlier, because this is another survey, and it was from top senior business executives and owners, very much like yourselves, and they listed what their top talent challenges were. The top was low employee motivation engagement, loss of top performers, and then leadership development. And I'm going to just break all three down for you in a little bit here, because surprisingly, the top two also are impacted by leadership development. So if we look at employee motivation and engagement, Gallup does a study like every year, and then they do an extended study like every 5. And they really do a great job with this. But Gallup measures 3 levels of engagement. They call it engaged, not engaged, and actively disengaged. So for our description or definitions today, the engaged are those individuals that are going to create innovation and move your businesses forward. They're coming in and they're fully all in. Those that are not engaged, they clock in, they do what they need to do for the day, they clock out, but they're just not in it. And then you've got a handful here, actively disengaged. Not only are these folks unhappy, they're downright disruptive to your organization. So if you look at the statistics, thank goodness US is in a better position than worldwide numbers. But that's still discouragingly low if we only have 30% of our employees, and just take your own staff numbers. How many employees do you have in your company, and what's 30%? You could probably name the individuals that you would claim to be engaged, that are really helping move your business forward. If we have low employee engagement, it impacts our organizations in the following ways. Job satisfaction, job performance, absenteeism, turnover, a lot of the same kinds of challenges that we looked at earlier, but it also impacts our sales, our shareholders' return. It's impacting our bottom line quite significantly. If we look at how engagement impacts an individual's intent to stay with an organization, you can see that if they are engaged, 81% are saying, absolutely, I'm going to stay. If they're not engaged, 22% are saying, yes, definitely, I'm going to stay. So engagement is critical to our organizations today. You know, not only from the standpoint of productivity and other factors, but when you think about the cost to replace an individual, depending on their position, the statistics are showing 90 to 200% of their base annual salary is what it's going to cost you to recruit, hire, train. You're going to have lost productivity in the meantime. That's a big number. So whether you may not see it as a line item in your P&L statement, it's hitting your bottom line. And the other factor to keep in mind is that our high performers are outperforming low by 5 times the output. And what do we commonly do with our high performers? When they're doing their job, are we spending a good percent of our time with those folks? No. Most of the time, we're ignoring them. We're just saying, let them do their thing. I got to spend 80% of my time over here with the low performers, and they're sucking the life right out of me. So we ignore the high performers, which is not what they want. Surprisingly, you're going to find they want feedback. They want praise. They want constructive feedback. They want to be challenged. Are we challenging our high performers the way they want to be challenged? Because if we're not challenging them, they will go elsewhere. We can't afford to lose 5 times the output from our high performers. So when we look at employee loyalty or lack of, now we're again seeing low morale, high turnover, disengagement. The same common challenges, all 3 of those top things that we talked about are causing the same issues internally within the organization. Well, when we move into the 3rd top challenge, which was leadership development, and we look at what mediocre leadership is doing to an organization, loss of team member engagement, loss of productivity, and loss of top performers. So leadership development is actually also part of the cause for those other 2 areas of concern. When people leave companies, by the way, do they really leave companies? Have you ever left a job before? Did you leave it because of the job? Or did you leave it because of your manager or some people around you who didn't like working with? Many times people leave because of other people. And many times it can be the boss. You know, we're creatures of habit, and we like being in our comfort zone. And when individuals truly, you know, kind of like what they're doing and they like the people that they're working with, they'll put up with all kinds of other things, maybe the pay, the benefits, vacation time. They'll put up with some things that aren't so great. But as soon as they're around them with the people that they're working with aren't going as well, many times we hear, well, I'm going to go down the street for $1 more an hour. If they're claiming it's because of the money, it's really because of something else that's already gone astray. So there's what we call this cascade effect with our leadership. And now Gallup and Wharton and others have conducted studies on this as well, that there is a true relationship between the leadership and the employees. So employees who are supervised by highly engaged managers are 59% more likely to be engaged than those supervised by what we would call disengaged managers. Essentially, the employee's engagement is directly influenced by their manager's engagement, whose engagement is influenced by their manager's engagement. So if we have senior leaders who are just out of the picture, not really engaged, wanting somebody else to deal with it, and they're not engaged with their immediate direct reports, if those direct reports aren't engaged with their direct reports, it is a cascade effect. So some challenge me on this, it's okay. But if you have an employee who's more of an entry-level employee and they're not performing, and everybody knows they're not performing, and all the rumblings are going on, why are we keeping this person? I don't know what they're contributing. In fact, they're actually quite disruptive to the organization, and people are starting to talk, and I don't know if you have anybody like that or not. And normally it's left to the manager that person reports to address it. But that manager doesn't address it. Is it really the employee, or is it the manager who should be accountable for that? But then who does that manager report to? That manager reports to the next level up, and that manager reports to the next level up, depending on how big or small your organization is. But if from manager to manager to manager it's left unattended, it will continue to go on. So we've got to make sure that we understand that cascade effect and our role that we play in our leadership development, how we hold people accountable. So back to this study. In parallel, Gallup measured management engagement. On the far right, you'll see the new numbers for U.S. management engagement. 35% engaged, 51% not engaged, 14% actively disengaged. And look how similar those percentages are to the level of engagement of employees. So if a manager's not engaged with their employees, if they're hands-off, if they're avoiding conflict, not providing feedback, not holding people accountable, then you're going to have employees who become disengaged. Another study, basically looking at the overall effectiveness of leaders. And this was not just by employees, this was a 360 study. So managers rated themselves, they were rated by their managers, their peers, and their direct reports. So it's a 360 study, and it showed that the overall effectiveness of leadership of these managers, that for those that were highly effective, they had highly engaged and effective performance from their employees. Basically saying, well, if you're the worst of the leaders in your leadership skill sets, your employee performance is going to be the worst too. And so again, a direct correlation between leadership and employees. Managers account for at least 70% of the variance in employee engagement scores across the business unit. Clearly a link between poor managing and those employees that are kind of checked out or disengaged. So again, the main factor in the workplace discontent is not wages, benefits, hours, it's more than likely their boss. 50% of U.S. adults have left their job to get away from their managers. So think about your leadership in your organizations, all the way from top down. clearly evaluate the leadership skill sets of each of the individuals, and that's easily done through a 360 type of an assessment. Understand where their strengths are and where their weaknesses are and things that they may need to improve upon. But clearly your leadership is impacting your employee base. Some of the top complaints from employees: supervisors lack clear vision and direction. Poor leadership at work is the most stressful part of their job. Their boss makes them feel controlled, manipulated, or defensive. Feel their career progress is limited because of the boss's poor leadership. And the big one, very last line, 62% said wouldn't follow their boss if their paycheck depended on it. So if you continue to do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. And I've heard that philosophy or that phrase so many times, and I do believe in it. But think about it today. If we just continue to do what we've always done, will we literally remain in business? Or will somebody pass us up and we become obsolete? We can't afford to just keep doing what we've been doing. We've got to make the shift. We've got to make the change, especially if we are truly expecting more of our employees today. We've got to learn to lead very differently. So I say we need to evolve. We need to evolve in our leadership capabilities. So when we look at leadership, there's lots of definitions for leadership. And in LMI, we reference that our leadership is basically getting very specific, favorable, or positive results, working with and through others. Getting very specific, favorable results, working through other people. Leadership is the people part of your responsibilities. Most senior executives or anyone in management, you probably have heard this before, they got to that position. Why? Was it through their people skills? Excuse me. Or was it because they did a great functional job? Right? Many times because somebody did a great functional job, we promote them into a management role where now they've got to deal with people. And how successful are all of those folks all the time? Do we provide them with people skills? Do we provide them with people training? Many times not. And so we fumble our way through. Many of us, myself included, learn to model and emulate those around us. Well, if they made it to that level, if they're a VP, if they're a president, if I want to get there, I got to do what they do, because obviously they did something right. And we just modeled and emulated. Nobody really told us whether they were the right folks to model and emulate. So we're in the people business. The predominant approaches to business leadership and management are presently inadequate to meet the demands of the future. Management is out of date. What ultimately constrains the performance of your organization is not its operating model or its business model, it's the management model. Remember, the labor movement has shifted. We expect more from our employees. We want them to take initiative. We want them to think, to become better problem solvers, decision makers, take ownership. And yet we're still pretty much trying to tell them what to do and how to do it through the old command and control style of leadership. So we've got to make the shift in our leadership. So you're thinking, okay, Nancy, move on. What do we do? What are the options here? Well, if you look at the old transactional style of leadership, which is what we're referring to, think about how you get people to do what you want them to do. Many times, the oldest form of quote-unquote motivation was through fear and punishment. Well, if you don't do what I want you to do, by golly, I'm going to go find somebody who will. You're attempting to kind of threaten the loss of their job if they don't do what you want them to do. That's kind of that fear and punishment. When we see fear and punishment going on in an organization, if we go through and we audit like a facility, and we just observe. What you see is that maybe you got some employees that are not quite fully productive and engaged in what they're doing, and then they see the manager walk up and they're like, oh man, just working my tail off to him. And then the manager goes around the corner and they're right back to doing what they were doing. So it's kind of like while the cat's away, the mice will play philosophy. And the worst form of the fear and punishment that we typically see is when an employee becomes extremely defiant and they do only exactly what you tell them to do. We do business with, manufacturing. I'll just give you a manufacturing example, or it could be even a market report or a stack of brochures going into a box. It could be anything. But the manager may say, I need you to fill up these boxes on this pallet, right? And you got all the stuff you're trying to fill up. The manager comes back and there's that one pallet and all the rest is still stacked up over here, and the employee's just sitting around either working on their phone or chatting with their buddies. Manager's, what's going on? I told you I needed you to fill up this pallet. He said, well, I did fill up that pallet. What? Well, you didn't tell me to go down and take the finished pallet to the warehouse and pick up a brand new pallet and start filling it up. Now, I see some of you smiling back there, so again, they become very defiant, essentially, and say, well, you only told me to do this. And that's when we see a lot of that kind of fear and punishment that may be going on throughout the organization. Not necessarily you, it could just be folks that you have on your team. The other is incentives and rewards. We're like, well, if that doesn't work, then we're going to bribe them. Let's give them a $50 gift card if they hit this level of performance. We're going to give them a $50 gift card, and the employees work and they maybe hit that level, and then next year, what do you want to do? You want to raise the bar, and what do the employees come back and say? Well, you gave me $50 last year, what are you going to give me this year? It's never going to be enough. And the last place we want to use that form of rewards and incentives or that bribery is in safety. And yet it's so commonly done. We want our employees to be safe, not because they're going to get a $50 gift card. We want our employees to be safe because they have the right to leave work and go home to their families just as safely as they arrived. But that comes from here. That comes internally. Now, these forms, they will work temporarily. You'll get some short-term results by doing this. But most of us, that's all we know. That's how we were raised. That's the only form of leadership, management, motivation we have ever been exposed to. And that's all we know, so we're out there trying a little bit of everything under these two forms of motivation, and we're wondering why it's not working for us long term. If truly from a transactional standpoint, if it's going on in our organizations, we are believing that people are motivated by this punishment and reward. These social systems work when there's a clear chain of command. That when they agree to do a job, they're going to relinquish that authority to me, their manager. They got to listen to what I'm telling to do. And the prime purpose of the subordinate is basically to do what I tell you to do. Now, that's a pretty common thought process. Isn't that kind of what we expect as managers? It is. So what's so wrong with that? It doesn't work long term. And many of us just haven't been exposed to the new way of thinking around leadership and how do we really motivate people. That's because about 97% of us are still transactional leaders today. We haven't made that shift from the agricultural and industrial age into the people age because we're still leading by the old command and control, telling people what to do and expecting them to do it. And until we can start cracking these numbers and making the shift from 97%, think if you've got about 60 people here, that's what, like 58 of us are transactional leaders. And we got to crack the numbers, we got to break that barrier, we got to start leading differently. And when you are one of the first who has been able to crack it, you're going to blow your competition away. People are going to want to come work for you, like they want to go work for Chick-fil-A. There's a reason people want to work for Chick-fil-A. So let's look, excuse me? They do get paid more? So can I ask you a question? How do you get them to smile and be polite to people? Is it because they're getting more money?
You're being more selective.
You're being more selective? Do you think it has anything to do with the expectations of the leadership? I mean, I walk into a lot of places. I mean, some of these really fine restaurants, I think they're getting tipped pretty well. And they're not the best servers. In fact, they're downright rude. Right? So just think a little bit, because I do hear a lot of times it's because they're going to get paid more. And that's not really always it. It contributes, especially because we're not going to get into this today, but it does contribute, especially when I look at South Carolina. And for anybody, this is a bonus. If you want to know what your demographics of your workforce are, go to the U.S. News and World Report. The last one was done, I think, in 2018. And it will break down for you every state in like 60 different demographic measurements. And what it shows for us in South Carolina is out of all of those measurements, we are in most of them in the bottom 10 when it comes to poverty levels, incarceration levels, single parent being raised by like a grandparent, when it comes to obesity, when it comes to health care coverage. I mean, there's a full list of measurements there, and it's really quite disturbing. And when we think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we truly have a lot of employees who are still trying to meet the basic needs of security, you know, of the roof over their head, food on their plate. And many managers can't understand, unless you've been through it with your church group, can't understand the mental philosophy of generational poverty and what drives people. I can't understand why anyone in their right mind would do blah, 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 because you've never lived in generational poverty. So we have to understand our workforce and where they're coming from, and through empathy and understanding, make sure that we're helping to provide those basic fundamentals of survival. It's a big deal. It really is. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay. So, problem with reward and punishment is that they can only reinforce current behavior. No way a transactional leader can drive the fundamental change that we're looking for, which is that transformation. Just as the corporation is being reinvented for the 21st century, leadership must also be reinvented. The prevailing leadership paradigm is that it's not sufficient for us to take us into the future. We must be willing to move beyond the past, move from a position based on fear and compliance to one based on trust, relationships, collaboration, most significant business challenge that we face today. So, we walk through the transactional. Transactional leadership, again, if they're basing fear and punishment, you're going to get potentially defiance from your employees. If you're really trying to motivate through incentives and rewards, you're going to get some compliance, but both are short-lived results. So what we're encouraging to make that leadership shift, just as our labor movement has shifted, is that we're looking at what we call the transformational leadership style. You know, these terms, these leadership components have been around a long time. It's just very slow to make the change because we've developed habits of being transactional leaders. And sometimes we do things we don't even understand what we're doing that's potentially negatively impacting the behavior change in our employees, which I'll walk through here in a moment. So what we're looking for in transformational is if we are truly building into our people, getting to understand what they are going through, even outside of the workplace. Because let's face it, what goes on at home, we're going to bring it to work. What goes on at work, we're taking home. You can't separate the two. And so by really understanding our people, helping to develop them and their skill sets, they become more self-confident and self-motivated through their actions. One of the things I hear from most employers today is, oh, we do a lousy job of training our folks. We are just lucky if we get a warm body to either get in and run this machine or do this work for us. It's like we do a lousy job of training. And one of the other presentations we do is the 5 reasons why people don't do what they're supposed to do, and 4 of them we as managers are responsible for. And it's many times we say, well, I know we've trained them, we gave them the standard operating procedure, we showed them, we walked them through how to do this at least once. But did we take the time to truly determine if they learned anything? We may have checked the box, but if we haven't taken the time to know if they learned how to do that job the way you trained them, and you might say, but I asked them. Well, how do you know they're trained? Well, because I first of all, I trained them, and then if you go and you ask them, they say, have you been trained? And they'll say yes. Is that really going to prove to you that they learned anything? Here's a bonus tip for you. Ask how and what kinds of questions. How would you go about doing this? What would you do first? If they fumble around and they can't answer adequately how and what kinds of questions, they did not learn. You may have checked the box on training, but they have not learned. So ask how and what kinds of questions. How would you go about doing this? What would you do first? It's not a yes or no. It's not a closed-ended question. You have to explain how they go about doing it. I had one person who was ready to be terminated because the manager had hired the person to create a strategy to completely realign the warehousing area to make it a smoother flow, smoother process from a productivity standpoint. And the person had been on the job at least almost a year, hadn't done it. And she was ready to terminate the manager. And I said, well, do you know why they haven't put this plan together yet? Well, he says he doesn't have the time. I said, well, he truly may not have the time. But next time you have that conversation, just for grins and giggles, just say, okay, let's just assume we figure out a way to get you the time. What would you do first? How would you go about developing the strategy? He couldn't answer it. He couldn't answer the question. He did not know how to develop that strategy. So where did she start focusing? On the development of the strategy and how to develop the strategy. He used time as the excuse. So we've really got to ask this how and what kinds of questions. So we've got to develop our people. They become more self-motivated. They start believing in themselves more, that they're capable of doing more things. They're learning how to do more things. They're going home, believe it or not, you might not hear, but they're boasting to their spouses about what their boss let them do today. Not a lot of transactional employees get to go home and boast about what they were allowed to do or what they were learning that's new in their jobs. If we help them to better understand their purpose and how they're the cornerstone of an organization's success, we start building some trust with those individuals. We start giving them greater responsibility. They start acting a little more autonomously on their own. We're now starting to develop more collaboration and commitment with our employees. So what does that look like? Well, it could be, in fact, I had the lab manager say, I don't really know how I contribute to the success of an organization. We just run tests all day. Okay, well, let's just work through this. You know, most companies are in business to either increase revenues or decrease expenses. That's how they generate profit, most of the time. And so what is your lab doing that's either helping to increase revenues or decrease expenses? What kinds of things do you test? Well, we test raw materials. Why do you test raw materials? Well, because some of the new raw materials potentially could run faster on the equipment, get better yields. Okay? If you're getting more productivity, do you think that's helping to maybe reduce some expenses? Do you think that that added capacity could help to let the sales group go out and sell more to fill that capacity? Oh. Okay. So if your lab wasn't around to do this, or to do it well, would that be a negative deterrent to the organization's success? And all of a sudden the lady's walking out there with a little top on her step. We got to help them understand how they're truly contributing to the success of our organizations. So if we have a transformational leadership approach, we believe that people will follow folks that are going to inspire them. Now, inspire doesn't mean let's be really charismatic and fun-loving and humorous. And inspiring can also be challenging them. It can get them to think. A person with vision and passion can also achieve great things. The way to get things done is through injecting that enthusiasm and that energy. Now, the energy, though, is many times the engagement. Spending time with an employee, helping them to become better employees at what they do. Employees will seek some inner fulfillment from their work. Employees will be willingly accepting responsibilities and accountability, and employees will become more creative and innovative. If you build into your employees, they will want to do more for you. It's kind of the approach. Overall, transformational leaders are about 130% more effective than the transactional leaders. And yet, discouragingly, again, there's that number, only 3% of leaders today have learned to lead the transformational way. Habits are hard to break. I know for me, I really wish I would have become part of LMI when I was growing up through corporate America, because I think even though I thought I was a pretty decent manager, it's like, oh my gosh, what could I have done if I would have known more about how to lead people? You must make the choice to take the chance if you want anything in life to change. So here we are. And basically what I'm going to age, kind of lean in, embrace what change is going to look like and how do you start the change. This is not a workshop journey. This is several years if you really want to make the change and put the commitment in. You can't learn to lead the transformational way through a workshop. You got to demonstrate it in everything you say, think, and do, basically. So from an engaging leadership standpoint, there's statistical differences from the leadership effectiveness. It's going to impact profitability, turnover, employee commitment, customer satisfaction, and the employee's intention to lead. Almost every study where we've undertaken to understand the impact of various dimensions of organizational effectiveness, leadership effectiveness has consistently had substantial impact. If we continue to ignore how we lead people, it will continue to negatively impact us. If we make the choice to make a commitment to lean in, to start making some of the hard changes, it will be a positive impact. Culture change obviously starts at the top, or it doesn't start at all. Leadership behaviors, decisions cited as the single most influence in an organization's culture. We've all heard that cultural changes start from the top down, right? The role of effective leadership cannot be overestimated. Change starts as a vision at the top. Engagement by the executive team can make or break the implementation effort. So whether you have 3 people on your management team, whether you have 10 people on your management team, it doesn't matter. Your management team needs to be consistent in how they lead. If there's variance in an organization, we are all over it. If there's productivity variance, if there's customer satisfaction variance, if there's sales variance, we are all over it trying to figure out and break down what's going on. But when there's leadership variance, and not all leaders are leading consistently, many times we don't do anything about it. And that's having one of the most negative impacts on businesses today, is because one leader is leading very differently from another leader. You know, we all have policies probably that say you got to be to work at a certain time. Most people in South Carolina are terminated either from time, attendance, or attitude. I don't know about anybody else, but time, attendance, and attitude are the three big reasons why people get terminated. They're not on time, or they don't show up, they miss too many times at work, or they really have a bad attitude. And yet when I get called in to see what you can do about these issues, first question I ask is, so do you have a policy? Do you have an HR policy around time and attendance? Yeah. Good start. Do all of your leaders implement the policy the way it's written and hold people accountable with consequences? Well, not everybody. You're going to see me refer to what we permit, we promote here in a moment. If we are permitting people to come in late, and we're just not paying any attention to our policies, and there's no consequences, what message are we sending to people, to our employees? First of all, we don't care if you show up late. It's okay. And second, policies, just words on a piece of paper. They don't mean anything, right?
Isn't this contrary to your crime and punishment slide?
No, it's accountability. It's accountability. We're not threatening. But here's the other thing. How do we onboard people? This is what's really funny, because I met with a supervisor recently. We did some one-on-one coaching. And she said, I don't know why I have to keep telling these people over and over again about what our policies are. We have an outside company that we've hired who go through all this onboarding. They go through our employee manual. They walk through all of our policies. Why is it that these folks can't get it through their head what our policies are? I said, well, I'm curious, how big is your employee manual? Oh, it's probably about that big. How much time did they spend onboarding with this third-party company? Oh, maybe half an hour. Can you grasp all the policies in your employee manual in 30 minutes? You've worked here 25 years. So some of it is make sure we do the right job of training, sharing information, but don't we all have to have policies that need to be enforced if we're going to run a business? It's just part of the job, right? What's better, to make sure that we properly educate on what the policies are and hold people to the policy and create that as a standard, or start having wishy-washy actions that people don't know what they can do or what they can't do, and then all of a sudden somebody gets, written up. Well, how come you didn't write Joe up? Joe came in late too. He didn't get written up. So in order to create that culture, there's got to be consistency. Okay? 3,000 leaders found that only 4% of them really felt that they had the mindset and the skills to lead today. So if you're feeling like, gee, sometimes I feel pretty confident in what I'm doing, and other days I just, I'm like the head on the desk going, oh my gosh, what's going on? It's okay. You're not alone. There's a lot of folks out there who are doing that, trying to figure it out. Top reasons for why leaders commonly fail. Interpersonal skills, and then technical and business skills. So let me just break that down. Interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence for one. That's your communication skills. And here's just a real simple classic example. Is this how much time I have left on? Real classic example. Happens all the time. You want somebody just to get you that report next week. So, Joe, can you get me that report? Sure, I'll get it to you next week. Perfect. You're expecting it at 8 a.m. on Monday. Joe thinks he has until 5 p.m. on Friday. all week long. I knew I shouldn't have given that responsibility to Joe. I knew he wouldn't do it correctly or do it the way I want. And was it because we weren't clear around our expectations? Hey, Joe, can you get that to me by Monday at 8? Joe looks at his calendar. Yeah, I think I can do that. But now there's clear expectations around communications. So communication skills is one. And the other is, protecting information, not sharing information is another concern for the interpersonal skills. Personal skills, time management, goal setting, those are organization, setting priorities, sticking to priorities. Those are your personal skills. That's the second reason there. And then the third is the technical and business skills. But where do we mostly spend our time and our investment in developing ourselves? Isn't it down here? But these things up here truly impact how we work with people. And leadership is getting those very specific positive results working with and through other people, right? We're in the people business. So we've got to spend some time also developing ourselves, and that's why many managers don't feel like sometimes they know what they're doing is correct, because we're working on the day-to-day business side of it, not necessarily the soft skill side of it. So when we look at, from a leadership challenges standpoint, it says most leaders want to grow their business or their organization, and the one thing more than any other that will determine the growth of the organization is the growth of the people. And the one thing that determines the growth of the people is going to be the growth of the leader. Leadership remains a top issue facing organizations around the world. 86% of CEOs feel that it's urgent or important. And yet only 13% say they do an adequate job of developing leaders at all levels. You're not alone. Main reason transformation efforts fail is because leaders are unwilling or unable to disrupt themselves, get out of their comfort zones. Transformation simply won't happen without leadership starting at the C-suites. CEOs, C-suite level executives must be open, passionate, and persistent about transforming themselves. Keep in mind, if people are modeling and emulating, if your employees who want to be you one day are modeling and emulating how you do things, do you want an entire organization doing the same kinds of things that you're doing? Some of us say, yeah, and that's a good thing. But some of us are like, I don't know. So we've got to model and emulate what we expect of others. They generally buy into the concept, but many folks also don't believe that they're part of the problem. That's why those 360 assessments are always so good for leaders, because it's like an eye-opening awareness of, oh my gosh, I thought I was doing really well, but I'm doing good with my managers, my peers, I should say, but my employees think I'm not doing so good at all, or my managers don't think I'm doing so good. My board doesn't think I'm doing so good. It's just an open way of being able to provide feedback on, from a development standpoint, what am I good at, what are my strengths, and what are some things that I really need to develop and work on. And it's a great way, a neutral way, to become more self-aware, get that feedback. So here's the what we permit, we permit. This is a slide that we use quite often in our development. It is the DNA of why people do what they do. It's called the success chain. So I'm going to just quickly kind of walk you through a couple of examples here. If I were to ask you all, have you had a successful year? What would you say? How many would say they're having a successful year? Others, maybe not so. You could do better. Because I saw about half the hands go up, right? But you're determining your level or your degree of success some way. How did you come up with, yeah, we're having a great year, or no, we could be doing better? How did you just quickly determine that? You said it. Say it again. How are you measuring your degree of success?
accountability.
What are your
employee
metrics?
engagement.
What are your goals? What are your measurables, right? And if you've got these results that you're measuring against, you can quickly determine if you're having a successful year or you could be doing better. So your degree of success is based on the cumulative results that you and your organization are enjoying. Those results are the consequence of behaviors, actions, things that you and everyone around you are doing. If everyone's doing what they're supposed to be doing, it should positively impact those results. If they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, it may negatively impact those results. If we're holding people accountable, if we're providing feedback, if we're consistent with our policies, if we're training people adequately, onboarding them adequately, having goals for everyone that cascade through the organization so they all roll up to the overall goals of the organization. If everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, don't you think you're going to get greater results? Absolutely. Our results are the consequence of our actions, our behaviors, the things that everyone in our organization is doing. So again, when we look at leadership, it's all about behaviors. Now, many times those behaviors are formed from attitudes, or think of it as beliefs. If we believe that we have got to do something ourselves in order for it to be done right, the action is we don't delegate effectively. If we believe that our employees are lazy or they really don't want to give more ownership into the organization, or we don't think we can trust them to do certain, we aren't going to give them the responsibilities to do it. So those beliefs really start entering in. I've had some folks who were just bottom line not wanting to cross-train somebody on a particular job function because they thought that person would do a lousy job, they're going to fight me on it, they're going to be argumentative. They waited to the last person to cross-train, and that person loved the new job. They did better at the new job than the people who were doing the job. But it was because of the person's attitude or belief about that person that they waited and didn't cross-train until it became a formal goal we were holding them accountable. Attitudes come from conditioning. Our conditioning comes from things that happen over and over and over again. That's that spaced repetition. I think about our demographics we talked about here in South Carolina. And let's just say we have an individual, we'll call him poor Johnny. Excuse anybody in the room who's named Johnny, but poor Johnny, you know, he's not the sharpest pencil in the pack. And poor Johnny, he just couldn't make a decent decision if his life depended on it. Poor Johnny's hearing this same thing over and over and over again as he's growing up, from his parents, from his coaches, from his teachers, from his bosses. Poor Johnny, what were you thinking? What stupid idea was that? You can't make a decent decision if your life depends on it. So all of this time as poor Johnny's going through this development, he's kind of starting to convince himself he can't make decent decisions. Well, guess what? Poor Johnny's now one of your employees. Poor Johnny comes into your office like it's a revolving door and says, boss, we got this problem, what do you want me to do? And what's the first thing that you guys do? You put your management cap on, and you say, my job is here to problem solve and to help people, so let's get as much information as I can from Johnny, and you tell Johnny what to do, how to do it, and you send him on his way. But we just said we want people to take greater initiative, to think for themselves, to be better problem solvers and decision makers. How did that action, that natural action that all of us take, how did that help Johnny to take greater initiative, become a better problem solver and better decision maker? It didn't. We don't even know sometimes what we do and how it's negatively influencing or impacting what we really want as a result, the behaviors from our employees. So just to give you a bonus, what should you say next time poor Johnny comes into your office and says, we have a problem?
You're fired.
Oh, spare poor Johnny, please spare him. What would you say? Yeah, who said that? What did you say again? Say it louder.
Ashes is English.
Right. Now, his opinion may be a bad idea, right? The last thing you'd want to say is, poor Johnny, you're an idiot. What were you thinking? You can't make a decent decision if your life depended on it, right? You don't want to say that.
I think you're an idiot, John.
You don't want to do that. But you look at it as a coaching opportunity, because more than likely what Johnny's going to do is say, no, that's not my job. I'm not paying, you're not paying me the big bucks. When you start paying me the big bucks, I'll start doing your job for you. But no. I mean, they're going to back off most of the time, initially. But as you really start coaching and you start saying, every time Johnny comes into your office, or anyone like Johnny comes into your office and say, Johnny, what do you think you ought to do? I really want to hear. And if you need some time to think about it, it's not an emergency. Go spend 10, 15 minutes and come back. I want to hear your thoughts. Every time he comes in, you say, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think Johnny one day is going to end up doing? He's going to come in and he's going to say, we got this problem, but I've been thinking about it, and we could either do this or we can do this. What do you think? And you're going to say, I think so. This one sounds good, or what about this? And you can ask questions, you can help use it still as coaching, and eventually he will stop coming in because you have coached him how to take greater initiative, think for himself, be a better problem solver, and a better decision maker. It takes time to change and develop new habits, but that consistency, and every time he came into your office, has got to be there so that he can change the habits. Okay? So whether it's delegation, whether it's difficult employees, whether it's taking initiative, many times if you have an employee problem, we've got to think about how we are responding and leading these folks in order to change the employees. It's a DNA of why people do what they do, both employees and leaders, and many times the leaders are part of the problem. And we don't even know it. We think we're doing the right thing because we've never been taught how to effectively lead through transformational leadership. So, on your desks, you've got a couple handouts. The first one is just a real quick little evaluation of commitment to leadership development, a rating of 1 through 5, 1 very poor to 5 very good. And it's just a couple questions for you to think about relative to where you are in your organization today. You can rate yourself. I don't have any prizes or anything, but you can rate yourself just to kind of evaluate, how do we think we're doing? You can even send this out through your management team. You could use it, with anyone, and just rate yourself and see where you think you might need to improve. What we're asking is that CEOs, current leaders, are they actively engaged in building a strong pipeline of future leaders? Are the current leaders equipped to develop future leaders? Are current leaders held accountable for building that pipeline of future leaders? Are they recognized for their efforts in developing leaders? Is the organizational culture, does it support and value leadership development? And then are the sufficient resources invested in the leadership development? So again, it's just something for you to think about there. The moment you stop learning is the moment you stop leading. If you want to lead, you have to learn. If you want to continue to lead, you have to continue to learn. So another thing that you can be thinking about through empowering not just yourselves, but your team members, the executive team members as well, as you move forward. Leaders become great not because of their power, but because of their ability to empower others. This is not a solo job here. You want to cascade this through your organization, starting at the top. So don't think you've got to do this alone. The second handout that you've got there on the front page is again kind of a checklist, kind of what do we do, how do we get started with creating a leadership culture. And so it starts off, not necessarily in this order, but it starts off with yourselves. How well do you know what your own current leadership capability, is? It moves into the executive team members to make sure, because sometimes some of our team members have gotten us to the success that we're enjoying today, but are they going to be the right individuals who are going to take us to the next level? So how do you know if you've got the right folks on your team? And then what are we doing to instill in their employees that development? Everybody should have a development goal every year, whether it's to become a more effective delegator, become better at goal setting, holding yourselves accountable, time management, whatever it may be from a development standpoint, soft skills or hard skills, but they should have a development goal, everyone, throughout the entire organization, yourself included. So this is just that general list that kind of is a checklist, but it'll kind of help to guide you through how that cascade will run through the organization. If you hold your managers accountable for also making sure that their direct reports have a development goal, that's just the first step towards becoming a transformational leader. As simple as that is. Having everyone on your team have a development goal, including entry-level employees. How easy is that? So again, doesn't need to require a lot of investment and money and even time. It's just the consistency in how you communicate and how you hold the accountability of the organization over time to create that culture around leadership. So that's on the front page, okay? As we move on, and again, I'm not going to go through each of these because it's on your sheet here, but as you move on that back side, if you really want to create a more formal plan, here are some things that you could include in your more formal plan of creating that leadership culture. First of all, spelling out evolving leadership needs. As your organization is changing or shifting with the environment around you, what are our evolving leadership needs going to look like here? Addressing management and professional channels for growth opportunities. Think about this. Many times we have individuals who want to go into management because they make more money as a manager. But they would be lousy managers because they have lousy people skills. They don't want anything to do with people. But that's the only way they can make more money. Organizations today are creating two channels. They're creating a management channel and they're creating a professional channel. So that if you know you don't want anything to do with people and you know you'd be a lousy manager, but maybe they're good at team project management, maybe they're committed to developing new skill sets to become experts in different areas around your company. It's kind of the rewarding and paying for performance. But they have different hierarchy, titles, and levels that they can aspire to in their professional channel that will allow them a little bit more income growth in an area that they're comfortable with. Other individuals are going to be more natural managers. They're going to be good with people. They're willing to put in that effort. They work their way up the management channel. So just think about a different way of offering that, because that's where we get ourselves into problems, is where we want people to gain greater income, but we move them into a management position because they did a great functional job and they're lousy managers for people reasons. So that's what that second line item meant. Identify future leader succession plan. Evaluate who are our future leaders. How do we start growing, grooming, developing them today, giving them experiences in different parts of our organization based on where we see them moving. People especially, and I don't know if this is going to be part of the millennial talk or not, but millennials especially, they want to know, what's my future going to look like in this company? I shared over dinner last night when my first company out of college was Dow Chemical, and we had what we called lifers. Anyone know what a lifer is? You probably had some in your organization. Do we have them today? A few? It's rare. Lifers are people who start their career with one company and retire from the exact same company. We were doing retirement parties for lifers all the time at Dow Chemical. Rarely do they have those today because there's so much movement going on. But millennials want to know what their future is. So identify future leaders in that succession plan. And then the last is the detail activities to strengthen short and long-term leadership skills. And that's just your leadership plan. So some things to think about there. So again, it's just a real simple handout. Okay? All right, last couple slides here. One thing I wanted to point out is many times when you are developing a leadership plan, outside independent studies, 4 major areas of development over time. And we talk about mastering these skill sets. Now when I say master, it takes over 10,000 hours to master something. So if anyone's a golfer, as an example, you know, you're not just great at chipping or putting, you've got to master all of the components that go into the game. And it doesn't happen overnight. It certainly doesn't happen virtually by watching golf tournaments on TV. You got to get out and you really got to practice this over and over and over in order to get good at it. So what we're saying is the common foundation is personal productivity. How you lead yourself, how you manage your time, how you focus your priorities and stay organized. That self-management is more of the executing the day-to-day. If you're lousy at meeting deadlines and time management, how can you possibly set the right example for people in your organization? So most people start there as your foundation. If you master personal productivity and are really good at it, the effectiveness as a leader is about 32%. Then the next level up is that personal leadership, work-life balance. If you are completely out of whack from a work-life balance and don't have your priorities there straight, it's going to negatively impact what goes on at work. And so many folks will work on their character, their work-life balance, what's important to them in life. And if they continue to focus and master on that level, the two combined will take you up to 52%. The third level is, now that I kind of got my own act going correctly and I got my own house in order, I'm going to work on how I lead other people. Set the right example. So that's the third level, motivational leadership, is how do I lead and motivate others in my organization. And if you can master all 3 of those levels, your degree of effectiveness goes up to 71%. And the last is the strategic. How do I strategically lead the future vision of my company, my organization? And if you can master that level as well, your degree of effectiveness as a leader is now 88%. But it's mastering. You can't do a one and done. You can't do a workshop. Sorry, don't like that. It's constantly focusing and mastering these things. So here's the hard part. When we evaluate how many leaders actually master these areas, about 45% they get to the personal productivity level. About 35% will get to that personal leadership level. But then it drops off to only 9% get to motivational leadership and only 1% do all 4. So what this is saying is that most people in leadership roles will get to about 52% effectiveness. 52% effectiveness. And then it's almost like I've arrived. I'm in management, I'm in leadership, I've obviously done something right, and now I've got all these day-to-day kinds of things that I'm responsible for, I've got to focus on, and they stop focusing on themselves. How can you possibly lead the strategic component of your organization if you're busy doing the day-to-day because you haven't effectively delegated and trained and relied on other people to do the day-to-day? Do you have a question, sir?
Yeah, here's my challenge with all of this. You're saying 10,000 hours in master, it's the equivalent of 5 years. Let's say I start tomorrow. I'll be dead before I can get the number for 1%. How do you do this?
And it's not necessarily you. You can think of your future leaders as well.
10,000 hours in master something.
It is 10,000.
5 years.
It means we need to focus on it every single day. it means we gotta be repetitive, even if it's the poor Johnny walking into our office and doing that one thing differently. We gotta constantly work on leadership, but the best part for most of us is most of us are in the mode of, in the next 5 to 10 years, am I going to take a lesser role in this organization? Am I gonna sell my company? I mean, that's where most of us, I don't know, maybe that's where I am. Where are we gonna be in 5 to 10 years, and am I prepared for that? So what a great way of working with the millennial generation. What a great way to create that succession plan for your organization, so you leave a legacy. There's a lot that can be done short term, but it means that we do need to continue to focus on this if we're going to become really good at it. But it also means we've got to rely on other people in our organization to help us. Times of rapid change, standing still is the most dangerous course of action. So at least identify one thing that you can take action on in like the next 48 hours. Just one thing. Because you're going to hear a lot of great things in the next couple of days. You can't possibly do them all. So I encourage you to walk away with at least one actionable item that you can get started with. One actionable item over the next 48 hours, because once you get started, then you start that momentum. So I encourage you to do that. Okay? Thank you.